Here's how I write my newsletter every week without writing a single word. Let me show you. All right. So I know what you're thinking, that the newsletter will just be some AI slop. However, what I do to give you an overview of the workflow is essentially my newsletter is a reflection type newsletter. So I'm sharing learnings with people like you about my journey and growing, building AI products. And here's a newsletter that I essentially just wrote. It includes insights, it includes, and everything essentially is collected without writing anything. And what I use for that is a homegrown kind of tool, but you can do this in Claude as well. I made a separate video on this. I called it Claude on steroids. So essentially, if you haven't seen that one and it's interesting to you what this tool exactly does, then go ahead and check that video out. For everyone else, here you can see my newsletter. It's essentially a chat with Claude. I have support for thinking here. I have audio support. And this is essentially also what I use to write the newsletter. So let's just walk through it. When I go in, I create a new chat, very similar to whatever happens in Claude. I have several tools here. Each of them are essentially a Claude project, so a system prompt that has one very specific job. And one of the cool features of this custom Claude implementation here is essentially that I can keep the context around, but I can switch the tool, which you can't do in projects because every time you have to start a new chat. And so what I do is I start with a reflection. And what I mean by not typing is that I just use Super Whisper, which is a transcription tool. Or I can also use my built-in workflow here. I actually built that yesterday with a one-shot prompt, and it works pretty well. But for the sake of you doing this within Claude, let's just use Super Whisper. So I have a shortcut here that's Control Space, which opens this panel. And now you can see that there is a recording happening, looking at the waveform here. And I say something like, hey, I want to reflect on last week. Last week was calendar week 10 of 2025. So now I sent this here, which starts a workflow. And the workflow is done for the team. So now I have to go in and say, it's just me. I'm going to do it alone today. All right. So now the tool is going to help me reflect on whatever time frame I want. For the sake of this guide, it's last week, and ask me what went well and ask me a couple questions, right? So what achievements are you most proud of? Which projects, blah, blah, blah. So this helps me to gather all the context that I need in order to write the newsletter. And then the writing is actually the easy part. The hard part is to come up with the context or come up with the learning that will actually be an interesting newsletter. But for the sake of it, let's keep it easy. I created an audio tool for my custom Claude implementation that will help me audio to text, which helps streamline my workflow whenever I input things into Claude on steroids. And it already helped me get more context into the conversation. All right, so now it goes on to what went wrong. At first, I tried to code this tool by hand and use Windsurf on the side, but it didn't really do what I wanted. And then I created another system prompt to create a PRD for me, which is a product requirements document. And when I handed that document to Claude, to Windsurf, it actually implemented it with one shot. All right, so now there's one thing that didn't work. And now it asks me, what do you need to stop doing? Process or practice no longer serve me well. So let's say, I think from now on, I will only implement a new feature with Windsurf if I have a PRD and I can hand that to Windsurf as context. And just make sure that the PRD is solid. That makes everything a lot less hassle during implementation. All right, so this wasn't planned part of the video, but essentially I have a tool that helps me save insights. That's also part of the custom implementation here, which then will be picked up as context for other chats later on. But yeah, so what do we need to double down on? Let's double down on building prototype features as fast as possible, and maybe leveraging something like V0, and keep refining that PRD generator, because it's just an initial system prompt that can probably be improved over time. So let's keep that in mind and do that later. All right, so now it's going to give me summary. And this is another tool I have. So it lets me create tickets in our project management tool, but I don't want to do that now. So I'm going to say no to that. But I think we have enough to write a draft. And how that works is I switch the tool to my newsletter writer, which is another system prompt. So I am now completely switching the tool that is working in the background from reflections to newsletter writing. And this is helpful because I get to keep the context around, right? So I still have all the reflections. I still have all the messages that came before, which also makes it more expensive, but it also makes the output better because there's no loss in summarization, for example. And this is something you can do with Claude, but I was copy pasting this stuff all the time. So now I can just do it with the click of a button. And now I can go in and say, hey, let's write the newsletter draft, which will give me a draft. And then part of the system prompt here is it's a few shot prompt. So essentially I gave it a few examples of my newsletter and the section that it has, for example, what's new and insight. So there's always one takeaway here for people reading the newsletter. And it's formatted as a quote. And there's something about a learning machine, which is essentially the book I'm currently reading, and my latest video. So it keeps to that structure, and it essentially uses all the context that I gave before, and it extracts the insight out of everything I already just told it, right? And essentially the learning here was that creating PRDs helps you to think the feature through, and also helps you create enough context for the AI tool to stick to what you actually want to implement, and not do more than that, or not like delete half your code base and all things that people are struggling with when using Cursor or Windsurf or whatever. And what I don't like though is that it basically just made this up, right? Because I wasn't telling it that I was reading Pragmatic Programmer, so that's some sort of what is it called, hallucination basically. But let's fix that. Hey, so I was actually reading this week a book called The Empty Raincoat, and I think one interesting takeaway here that I want to share with people is that within different areas of the world it has different shapes and form. And in Germany, a lot of the work is being done in what's called the Mittelstand, and there's 300,000 businesses, at least at the point of when the book was written, that essentially make most of the economy, and they're run like family businesses. So Mittelstand is oftentimes a family business that is inherited. And there's something that's called the third generation problem, which is essentially that the third generation usually gets lazy and bored, or either or, and they don't necessarily want to run the business anymore. So that usually leads to it being sold, or just shut down, or whatever happens after. And it's a big problem. And I thought it was interesting, and that's the insight, that it's completely different. Also the social aspect, right? So in Germany, the business is for the good of everyone, and not just for the shareholders, which is in a lot of kind of UK and US businesses. But obviously we have to keep in mind this reflects like 1992 or something. So I think there's a shift that has happened already as well, or towards that form of capitalism, right? So keep that in mind. All right. So that will, first off, is an example of a longer message, right? But that lets us kind of, okay, what's new? All right. So now it actually did something stupid. I didn't want to have that. So I just go in and say, hey, let's talk. Hey, I want to keep the insight about the PRD. I just wanted the becoming a learning machine part to be about the empty raincoat. Let's fix that. All right, so what it did, it changed the insight completely, which I didn't want. But let's see. Okay, so now we're back to insight is proper. empty rain code here. That part is good. The video, yeah, I'll leave that for now. It's not that important. But I have another nifty tool now that I use, which is essentially a persona simulator. So this lets me simulate responses by different personas. And they're purely also just AI. What helps is to poke holes into the newsletter and see where it can be improved. Let's do that. Simulate 10 different readers of my newsletter, which is a newsletter that shares of building startups and building AI products, and make sure it's a relevant audience. And then, help me to refine the newsletter with those reviews of the newsletter. So what I'm doing now is essentially simulating people reading the text, different personas, different backgrounds, solo founder, serial entrepreneur, product manager, CTO, whatever. So 10 different ones. And they will give me what they like and don't like. So for example, Maya appreciates the practical insight about the PRD approach. She's been struggling with something similar because I guess she's a product manager. So for her, it's very close. Okay, serial entrepreneur. And then it gives me a combined response, which is essentially the newsletter, positive feedback because it's practical. Many readers desire more specific details about what made the PRD effective. So essentially including a template or example. So this helps me refine the newsletter before I send it out. And it just helps me make it better. I can also have this other tool here, which is a personal board of advisors. So essentially different kind of entrepreneurs that I look up to and try to take from. And they can challenge what I wrote here, right? So that's another, these aren't random people, but they're more well-known, random emulated people. They're more well-known like entrepreneurs and things like that. So let's do that as well. Help me challenge my assumptions in the newsletter or what I have as insight in the newsletter with the help of my board of advisors. So that will go in, essentially give me another perspective, right? So I have Jason Cohen in here, Benjamin Franklin, Marcus Aurelius. So different people and different roles that they have, like different people that I look up to and whose advice I, appreciate, but I can't really talk to them. So I have the AI kind of emulate how they think about things. So for example, I want to be a teacher, and Marcus Aurelius for me is my perfect teacher because he teaches about life and whatnot. So what he says is the newsletter shares the insight, but doesn't provide guidance on how to create an effective PRD. So essentially very similar to the responses here, I would say. And I get some recommendations on how to improve. Template, key components, time, money saved with this approach. All right, and now I can also go in and say, help me implement the specific detail recommendation. So include a template for a PRD and outline the key components. So now I'm essentially going in and I'm revising the newsletter based off of this feedback. And because all of this is in context, it knows even if I was to write a shitty prompt, which I am, I'm just throwing shit down here, it would know what I'm referring to. So now it includes a PRD template. Obviously, this isn't the one that I created. I could go in and I could say like, hey, change this PRD template to be about, audio, which is the feature that I built with it. And that would make it even more relevant. But yeah, I think for the sake of showing this to you, I hope this was interesting. And yeah, this is how I write my newsletter because I'm not a good writer. And I don't think the newsletter key value is the writing style. I think if there is value in the newsletter and people see it, then it is in the story or the insight and the context. And that I provide. And then I use AI for what is great, which is to quickly write and iterate on stuff like a newsletter. All right. If that sounds interesting to you, stuff like this, feel free to subscribe below and I'll see you next time. Cheers.